my whole life was about writing my script. Like, that's kind of all I did. So I was telling you that to admit that I missed a lot. I personally, because this was not my first show, it was like my 8th show that I'd had over the course of my life, I made a very clear deal with my employer out loud and just said, look, I'm not going to be told what to say or think, period. It's not my company. If you don't like what I'm saying, take me off the air. But I'm not going to sort of say or not say something because that would violate my conscience, and I can't do that. So, and they agreed, to their great credit. And then at the end, they exercised their option and pulled the plug, which was their prerogative. And I wasn't really mad. I was confused, but I wasn't mad about it. And I'm not mad now. So I'm not really sure, but I will say, looking back on it, the Ukraine war and the vax, and to some extent January 6th, on which I think I've been fundamentally vindicated. I had out-of-step views on all 3 things. But 2 of them were absolutely, were red lines, like you couldn't go there. And I'm not exactly sure why. I mean, I think for different reasons. The vax, because obviously the pharma companies are the biggest advertiser in media. They don't advertise to sell their products. You're not, people aren't buying mostly. They can't buy them directly. So why are they doing that? Well, they're doing that not to sell the product, but to influence the coverage of the product. And that's very effective. So I crossed that line in a big way because I thought the vax was dangerous, and it turns out it was. And then on Ukraine, it's like every single person in the top 1% for income and influence, like literally almost every single person, heard this weird frequency, this dog whistle that commanded them to worship Zelensky. And I'm not exactly sure what that was. I looked at Zelensky and I'm like, that guy's really bad. Yes. He wants to get my country involved in a nuclear war. And, I don't know him, so I'm not attacking him personally, but anyone who wants my kids to risk death in a nuclear war is my enemy. It was just kind of that simple. So I was like, this guy's evil to the extent that he's acting against my children's interests. And saying that was like, oh my gosh, it was like a bomb going off. Like people couldn't even deal with it. And I'm not quite sure what that was, other than everybody in Aspen, Nantucket, Jackson, and Bethesda was like all in on this thing. And someday historians will discover why. I really don't know, but that fact is true.
That's such an important point. And this is another thing too, I've always respected them most is, to a certain extent I rejected the system early on, but you came up in it and you also openly gave them the middle finger, even while growing up next to them, living next to them for years. Yeah. I've watched it with Ukraine and I watch it now with Israel. I watched in particular, there was a lot of consternation around some comments you made, I think by Ben Shapiro and other, where you were like, well, I've never seen this level of care about Americans who are dying of fentanyl, which I think is a traditional nationalist message. And yet I've watched the entire kind of right-wing ecosystem get embroiled in fundamentally what is a third world conflict. Now we can say support, not support, we can have criticisms, et cetera, of that. But what explains this like literal allegiance to narrative on Ukraine, on Israel? Why is it that so many of these people don't seem to have the same level of care for actual American citizens?
I find it really distressing. And in both of those conflicts, I approached it with a clean conscience because I just don't have strong feelings one way or the other. And I'm not hostile. I've never hated Ukraine. I don't have any feelings about Ukraine. And Russia, same thing. I've never been to either place, and I'm not invested emotionally. So I could just look at it from an American perspective. In the case of Israel and the Arab world, I've spent a fair amount of time in both, and I like both. And I felt terrible for the people who were killed on October 7th. I still do. So I had no weird motive. I was just like thinking about it from an American perspective. Is this good for us or is it not? And I was just amazed by the intolerance and the willingness to immediately go to invective and character assassination. And it's like, I said, first of all, if the people who live in Gaza who are being moved out are so evil and dangerous that they can't live in the region, why would you want them to move into my country? I mean, what are you saying? They can't live there because it's too scary to live next to them, but they can live next to me? So I at that point, I felt very hostile about that because it showed such contempt for me and my family and my neighbors and my country. It is my country. That's how I feel about it anyway. It's all of our country. And so I was like disgusted by that. And I said so, and I don't know why that's weird. Why wouldn't I be offended by that? And then it was immediately, I'm a hater or a bigot or something like that. None of that registered with me because, first of all, I've been attacked for so long, but attacks that aren't true, if somebody said, wow, you've gained some weight this summer, I'd be like, oh, it would hurt my feelings because it's true. But if someone's like, oh, you're a hater or you hate, That's not true. So I don't really care. But I did think it showed like the level of not just corruption, which I knew, but of like emotional instability and craziness. I mean, there are people, and I stopped reading any of it, but there are people on the right who have spent the last 2 months every single day focused on a conflict in a foreign country as our own country becomes dangerously unstable on the brink of financial collapse with tens of millions of people who shouldn't be here in the country. We don't know their identities or the purpose of their being here. Like stuff that's could destroy the country for real and make it impossible for my kids to live here. They've said nothing about that, and they're focused with laser intensity on foreign conflicts. And I'm like, at some point, I've got 4 kids. If I'm so caught up in the problems of my neighbor's children and completely ignoring my own children as they get addicted to drugs and kill themselves, you know, I'm not against helping my neighbor's kids, but clearly I don't love my kids. I mean, that's the only logical conclusion, and they don't care about the country at all. And that's kind of their prerogative, but I do, because I have no choice, because I'm from here, my family's been here hundreds of years, I plan to stay here. Like, I'm shocked by how little they care about the country, and including the person you mentioned. And I can't imagine how someone like that could get an audience of people who claim to care about America, because he doesn't, obviously, right?
Right.
So Tucker Carlson, yesterday, he did a show